I'm Don, and welcome to the Music Breakdown. What you are seeing here today was streamed live to Twitch at my Twitch channel, casting_404, linked in the description. Check it out every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time to catch me live. Thank you so much. Enjoy the video. Beatles tier list. The Beatles, best. They're the fucking Beatles. I've loved the Beatles for a really, really long time. I have loved the Beatles for a very, very long time. When I first got into music, this was one of the first bands I was heavily into. And I will never not be heavily into the Beatles. An incredible, lovely fucking band. And we're going to do a tier list of all their albums. If you've never seen my Beatles retrospective, don't watch it. But I did make it, and it has a lot of views by my standards, okay? To give myself some credit, but I hate the video. Let's go. Starting with Please Please Me. I'm going to put Please Please Me in the C tier. Please Please Me is a very historically important album. While it has influence on rock music, it's more just that it started the career of the Beatles, and I think that's why people see it as being so essential historically. I am not going to deny that aspect of it, and the fact that some of the singles for this album are really some of the most important and universally relevant early rock songs. But it's not that great of a record. It has tracks like I Saw Her Standing There, Love Me Do, Twist and Shout, some of the best early Beatles tracks. It also has a lot of pretty weak covers and a lot of just generally kind of weaker Beatles tracks. It's okay. It is okay. The album is okay. It's not the Beatles in top form. It's okay. You know, it has some great songs on it, but I definitely don't think it holds up really as an album. It's fine. I'm going to put it in the C tier. The next album is With the Beatles, which I'm also going to put into the C tier. I don't really know which of these two albums I prefer. I mean, Please Please Me probably has the higher highs, the more memorable tracks. This album is a lot more uniform. It's a lot more samey. A lot of these songs, and the production is just worse, honestly. It's you know, it has a lot of good tracks on it. It's just not really, it doesn't really have anything in the way of historically important tracks or some of the best early Beatles songs or anything. All My Loving is really the only one I can think of. This is a good album, but in the broader Beatles discography, it has even less importance than Please Please Me. It's enjoyable. It just doesn't go any further than that, and it doesn't really see them expanding their sound in any way whatsoever. If anything, it honestly sees them regressing a little bit, because Please Please Me had a little bit more in the way of variety than this album does. So that's where I would put that. The next album is Hard Day's Night, which I'm putting in the B tier. Hard Day's Night is one of the best early Beatles albums. It has tons of great tracks. It is highly entertaining, lots of memorable songs. The particular soundtrack section of this album is just great. I mean, the film is amazing, you know. The film is a classic. And the songs that are in the film are classics as well. I mean, Hard Day's Night, Can't Buy Me Love, you know. Hard Day's Night is just a very entertaining album. I think it's a lot better than Please Please Me and With the Beatles. Way more fun, way more energy, and a little bit more ambition, too, than at least With the Beatles. The songs at least feel like they have a little bit more variety. It's a very fun album. Very, very fun pop rock album, and I think one of the most essential and memorable of the early Beatles records. Very, very good album. Next up is Beatles for Sale, which I'm also going to put in the B tier. This album is really good in my opinion. I think that this album sees the Beatles taking on some of their more folk influences. They're clearly getting more and more influenced by Bob Dylan here. The pop rock tracks in this album are great. A lot of the covers are really fun, and some of their honestly best early songs appear in here, like I'll Follow the Sun and No Reply, I'm a Loser. It's a darker album. It just comes across as a more depressed album from the early Beatles, which is very odd. And it isn't hampered by that. It's not an overall dour record, but there are some pretty dour songs on this album. And I think it's just more interesting songwriting wise than some of the other ones from this period. And I'll put it in B. The next album is Help, which I'm also going to put in B. But I will say Help is an incredibly messy album. It has some pretty crap tracks on it. Um, but it also has some of their absolute best material. The Help title track is one of the best Beatles songs. Ticket to Ride is one of the best Beatles songs. Yesterday is one of the best Beatles songs. I've Just Seen a Face is one of the best Beatles songs. Like, there are so many great tracks on this album. The fact that there are some pretty shitty tracks like Act Naturally doesn't really ruin that for me. Um, it's a very solid album. It's got a lot of it's the most, at times anyway, it's the most mature of the early Beatles records. It really feels like it's bridging the gap between early Beatles and later Beatles. This is very much like mid-period Beatles, and it feels like the gateway drug to later Beatles. Very good album, and I very much do enjoy it. Next up is Rubber Soul, which I'm gonna put this in the A tier. I'm gonna put this in the A tier. It's A plus. Rubber Soul is, songwriting wise, like song for song, easily one of the best Beatles albums. And the vibe, the feeling of this album is just so great. It is the Weed album, but this breezy poppy folk rock that they go for in this record is just phenomenal. It's so entertaining. There's so many fun tracks, and it's probably the first time I think that the track list on the album flows really well and is really enjoyable to listen to song for song. It doesn't just feel like a collection of tracks. It feels a lot more like an album. It isn't all the way there on that front yet, but it's definitely a lot closer than some of the earlier records. This album has so many fucking S tier Beatles songs on it. It is crazy. There are so many amazing songs. Yeah, Drive My Car, Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man, Michelle, Girl, fucking In My Life. I'm leaving out a bunch, but God, this album is so good. This album is, sometimes it's very groovy, sometimes it's very folky, but it's killing it every single thing that it tries. It's like the final realization of the sound I think they were trying to go for on the last two albums with Beatles for Sale and Help. You can hear that fully evolve into something on this album, and it is a classic. I just think that this is one of their most personable and enjoyable albums, and it has so many of their best songs. So that's why I have to give it A tier. Next up, we're gonna go for Revolver, which is an S tier. Okay, S tier album. And this tier list is gonna be really funny, but I fucking love the Beatles. Revolver is just such a massive step forward in so many ways. I mean, songwriting wise, this album, song for song, is damn near perfect. There is not even a remotely weak track on this album. Track for track, what an incredible collection of songs. I mean, some of the most ambitious but still digestible work they've ever done. I think when you compare it to something like Sgt. Pepper's or the White Album or even Abbey Road, these songs are very digestible. They still very much feel like fun, catchy pop rock songs, but they managed to bring so much into them. Like, this album is highly psychedelic, one of their most psychedelic. It is colorful. It is unique. And like, God, is it catchy? I mean, there's so many catchy tracks. Every time you listen to Revolver, you get a song stuck in your head. You know, it is fabulous, to use a term that the Brits would use. Honestly, yeah, song for song, one of their absolute best records. Just so fucking good. I could talk about the highlights of this album, but like, I would list just about every track here. It really is that good. Just what an amazing album. What an amazing album. And next up is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which is an S tier. This is actually my personal favorite. There is just something about this colorful, playful world that the Beatles create on this album which entrances me no matter how many times I hear it. It is one of their silliest and also most emotional and also most strange albums. It just does so many things. It expands upon Revolver and makes an album that is much more of a unit. And I think this is really the first time where the Beatles fully understood how to craft an album, because the album craft on this record is some of the best in history. It flows impeccably, and it does so even with all of the disparate and different directions this album goes on. This is an album that can flow from With a Little Help from My Friends into Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and it doesn't even feel messy. Like, these are two completely different tracks. Some of the songs in this album build a completely different world than other songs do, like A Day in the Life, which somehow closes this album in a completely perfect way, despite the fact that it kind of goes in a direction that the rest of the album doesn't. But it is seamless. It is absolutely seamless. This album is just, it is so fucking perfect. It is so perfect. Like, again, song for song, best Beatles song after best Beatles song after best Beatles song. I mean, it's just like all S tier shit. It's my personal favorite. I just love the world that it builds. I love the songs. It's like, I can't listen to this and not sing along. And let me also mention the bass work. The bass playing on this album is so good. Paul is such a good bassist. He played bass in a much more melodic way than most bassists do, and I think that is actually what gives the Beatles their distinct sound. In all of pop rock, the Beatles, you know a Beatles song when you hear it, and a lot of that is the melodic bass playing that Paul did, and that's all over this record. I love the bass line in this album. If you've never paid attention to that, I highly encourage you to give this a listen and pay attention to the bass work. It's so good. Yeah, A Day in the Life is the best Beatles song in my opinion, but there are many tracks here that you could say that about. Just what a phenomenal record, beautiful album, and an easy S tier. Next up is Magical Mystery Tour, which I'm going to put in the A tier. Magical Mystery Tour is a weird one because at the end of the day, it isn't really one of the main Beatles albums. When this was released, it was released alongside the TV film, and it was only, you know, I think 6 songs, right? And those 6 songs wound up on a 6-song EP in the UK. It was only when it came to America that they added the second side on to the LP version, which was basically just made up of some of their singles from around the time. A lot of the singles on this album, or the second half, are songs that were made for Sgt. Pepper's, like Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever. And they very much do continue to have that sound, but there is a particular keyboard tone that I associate with this album that I definitely don't with Sgt. Pepper's. That, like, there's this, I don't even know how to describe it. There is just a keyboard tone that is a Magical Mystery Tour keyboard tone, and I hope you know what I'm talking about. It has a pretty distinct and consistent sound, even from the first side to the second, even though in a way the second side wasn't really designed for the album. But we'll talk about it as if it was all meant to be this way. I mean, the first side of this album is quite messy, is the thing, like, and it makes sense because it is a soundtrack for a really weird, off the beaten path kind of movie. But it does have I Am the Walrus on it. I mean, for God's sakes, you know, that song, on some days, that's my favorite Beatles song. I mean, the way that it builds with instrumentation, the way that each verse sounds different than the last, just the creativity of the vocal parts and the string sections and the amazing bridge, and then that outro, which just blows my mind. What an amazing song. And it's my favorite song on this album. This album also has fucking Strawberry Fields Forever on it, which is one of the most unique like chart topper songs probably ever. I mean, this is a highly adventurous and experimental track for them. And it is a very mind-bending and weird song. The way that every verse is completely different in sound, and the transitions and the segues, it's so interesting. God, just all over this album, it is brilliant. It is brilliant. There are so many great tracks, but the main thing that hurts it is really just the first side, which has a couple of songs that aren't really that great. Some of these just aren't some of my favorites, like the Magical Mystery Tour title track, the Flying instrumental, Your Mother Should Know. Like, these are very enjoyable songs, but they're just not necessarily some of my favorite tracks. The second side, however, is full of really some of their best singles. I mean, Hello Goodbye, Penny Lane, All You Need Is Love, like, come on, you know? So in some ways it's very stacked, and in other ways it's quite inconsistent, but I'm going to put it in the A tier. Next up is the White Album, which I'm going to put in the S tier. In the S tier. Let's go Beatles. The A tier's gonna get passed up a little bit here, but seriously, I mean, what's interesting is that, you know, the White Album is essentially the follow-up to Sgt. Pepper's, and the White Album is so it just strips back all of the artistic ambitions that they had and turns their entire sound inside out. And my God, when you just let the Beatles at this point in their career just write a bunch of songs, they churn out banger after banger after banger. It is like they just can't help themselves. The uniqueness, the strangeness, the allure of this album, it is so fascinating. And like, even though they tried to strip back their sound, and you can tell, it's still highly ambitious. There are so many tracks which go in such interesting directions. They try out so many styles all across this album, despite the general overall pop rock vibe. And even though and once again, like song for song, so many of just the best Beatles songs of all time, like While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Back in the USSR, Dear Prudence, fucking, you know, fucking Helter Skelter, Happiness is a Warm Gun. I could go on and on and on, but there's so many hidden gems all throughout the album too. And even some of the dumber, just more throwaway songs just fit so well that I end up liking them just as much as some of the best tracks here. The flow completely makes this album. Some of these songs on their own are kind of whack, but just because of the way they designed this double album, it all comes together in such a way where it's just like one of the most wonderfully creative and interesting works ever put out by any band ever. It's fun, it's weird, and it's got so many amazing songs. And I mean, it is bold too, like with Revolution 9 on this album, which is one of the most interesting and coolest, most unique tracks in their entire discography, pulling from Sound Collage, just a straight up sound collage piece for a band who was topping the charts consistently. And I don't think people nowadays don't like realize how kind of insane that is. What an amazing album. And definitely one of their best. Next up, we have Yellow Submarine, which I really don't feel like I should even consider a Beatles album, but I'm going to put it in the D tier. This album is just a completely useless record. It has no justification to exist alongside these other albums. The Yellow Submarine film is my favorite Beatles movie. I love the Yellow Submarine movie. I loved it since I was a kid. That was one of the first Beatles properties I was ever introduced to. And for the longest time, it was the only Beatles I even knew. I didn't really actually get into the Beatles until much later. The film barely features the Beatles, though, is the thing. The Beatles only show up at like the very end of the film. And the soundtrack is made up of some of their outtake tracks, some George Harrison outtake tracks, and like I think the only song they wrote for the movie was All Together Now, which is a pretty crap song. I do like the George Harrison tracks, and they are honestly some of the weirdest songs in the Beatles discography, which is quite interesting for like the kids movie. They decided to go with some of the most experimental psychedelic tracks of their career. Like It's All Too Much and Only a Northern Song, I think, are really sick. Hey Bulldog, like, yeah, Hey Bulldog is one of their best rocker tracks, if not the best. Amazing, amazing riff. But, you know, that's just the first side. And even on the first side, you have Yellow Submarine and All You Need Is Love Again, which already appeared on previous albums. And then you have the second side, which is just like a cinematic score by George Martin, and there's like nothing special about it. It's an album that just has no reason to be considered part of the canon, and I definitely think that it belongs in the D tier. It just has no place in this discography, and despite having a couple of tracks unique to it that are great, it does not justify it. I think it's the worst of any of these albums, and I think that's easily the case. Then we have Abbey Road, which was the last album to be fully recorded, so it really is the last Beatles album. Easy S tier. Easy S tier. I mean, look, this is a lopsided tier list, but it's the fucking Beatles, okay? Abbey Road is just such an amazing album. It opens itself up to me more and more with time. Everything about it is just remarkable. I mean, once again, song for song, god damn, I mean, fucking Come Together, Something as the duo opener of this album is insane. Like, two of the greatest songs of all time, just back to back opening up this album. But there's so many amazing and creative tracks all throughout the first half of this. It's like a mixture of the White Album and like Revolver and Sgt. Pepper's in terms of its adventurousness, but also its focus on songwriting. I mean, the orchestrations that George Martin adds to this album just adds so much. The production is the best of any Beatles album. It sounds incredible no matter how you listen to it. The bass playing is incredible, as I've mentioned before. All of the playing is incredible, and the songs are just so fucking good. This album gets so ambitious in so many ways. I Want You, She's So Heavy is one of my absolute favorite Beatles songs. It is immense in a way that Beatles songs almost never are. Highly unique track for them, and it just absolutely rips. And then the medley is just such a delightful, creative, and interesting work. It is so fucking good. Every single moment of that enhances the other moment, and it's one of the most interesting stretches of any album ever. One of the most perfect examples of why the album format is so good. And with the final three tracks, Golden Slumbers carry that weight in the end. Just one of the most iconic and memorable and amazing endings to any album ever. I mean, Abbey Road is just such a perfect, brilliant, lovely album. I could talk about it all day. And I think that, it goes without saying. Let It Be, I'm gonna put in the B tier. I like Let It Be, and this album does have some of their best songs. And keep in mind, this was made between the White Album and Abbey Road, so this was still during a creative peak for them, but you can tell they're a little burned out. And after having seen the Get Back documentary film, you can see that even more so. It's not their best set of tunes. It has some amazing tracks on it, and some of the sound of this album is highly predictive of the sound that rock would take in the 70s, which I think is interesting and probably a highly influential work. But there are some great tracks on here. Two of Us is fucking lovely. You have Dig a Pony, which is really, really good. And then, of course, the title track, Let It Be, which is one of the best Beatles songs easily. One of their tightest and most soulful songs. As well as The Long and Winding Road, which I just love, even what Phil Spector did to it. But there is no denying that the studio meddling here and the Phil Spector meddling really fucked up this album. But even with that said, I don't think it really would have been that great as it is, because there are just some pretty weak tunes here. For You Blue is like the worst George Harrison song, and it's really funny because when you watch the Get Back documentary, you can see that he presented them a lot of songs that would wind up on his album All Things Must Pass, and the Beatles rejected them, which is hilarious because they let him do fucking For You Blue. They also play One After 909, which is like a really old song from them back in like the 50s. They wrote that, like 58 or 59 or something, and it's just okay. And it's really messy. It just comes across as very sloppy. It doesn't really have much of a cohesive feel, and a lot of the songs just feel like they're not the best that they could do, but there are a lot of great tracks on it. And so, overall, it's good, but it doesn't stack up with the best of their work. So that is my Beatles tier list. Okay. I know it's a little bit lopsided towards the S tier and the B tier, which is interesting. But I mean, I can't help it. I'm a huge fan. So this is my Beatles tier list. If you're watching this on the channel, thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to see the Music Breakdown live, we are live every 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time on every Wednesday. So come check us out. Everything you saw here was streamed live, and you can see it next time. So I'll love to see you there. Thank you so much.